Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 260. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about pilgrims and pathways and bicycles as we visit the Camino di Santiago in northern Spain.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have two news stories for you. The first one is still playing out in the news, and that is a hornet's nest that American Airlines kicked when it decided to pull its fares off of orbits. Now, there's going to be a lot written about this story, but basically American Airlines is just fighting for a greater share of the $5 ticketing fee, and you can understand why. It's a tough day to be an airline. But one of the things that has already happened because of this is Expedia announced that they were not taking the American fares off of their site, but making them just a little harder to find. And then even Sabre, that was originally started by American, which is a ticketing agency, has apparently made it harder for their employees to book American Airlines. So stay tuned. This story is a bit of a showdown, and we'll be hearing more about it. And then speaking of showdowns, a pilot in San Francisco had his deputy status removed and his federally issued firearm confiscated because he took pictures of the San Francisco airport all in public areas, just showing that the security that the grounds crew go through is not as serious as the security that the pilots go through. The TSA didn't like that. For links to both these stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Ben Dixon from Atlanta, who has come to talk to us about the Camino di Santiago. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just glad to be here.
Now, this is an interesting thing. When Ben pitched this to me, I don't know if everyone is familiar with the old pilgrim way across northern Spain, the Camino de Santiago. I've always thought this would be a great trip, but who has the time to walk it in a month? And you didn't, but you still did the Camino Santiago. Tell us your secret here.
That's right. The Camino de Santiago is actually a collection of routes to Santiago de Compostela. So in general, people will start just past the French border, come into Spain, and then walk for about 30 days to get to Santiago de Compostela. I didn't have that much time because, I have an office job and only get about 2 weeks vacation or so. So I rode a bicycle across it. According to the church, you can get there in various ways. So you can hike, which is the traditional way, or you can ride a horse. You could take a donkey, or you can do like I did and take the bicycle.
Till you had mentioned that to me, I don't know that I had heard anybody who had done that way. I know people who've hiked it, like Craig and Linda, the Indie Travel Podcast, friends of the show.
Right.
But is that something that's common and I just missed it, or is that still fairly uncommon?
Out of the number of pilgrims that do the Camino each year, I'd say it's maybe 5% of the pilgrims that I came across were on bicycles. Another thing about that, though, is that I also stayed on the pilgrimage route. I didn't take the road route. There's 4 bicycles that you can take. So some people will take their road bikes, for example, and just ride a separate route from the actual trail to get to Santiago. There's different ways, like there's the Camino Francés, there's Camino del Norte, there's different paths you can take, but there's not a required route that you must take to get to Santiago. So most bicyclists, I imagine, would take the road because it's a lot easier.
And when you say a required route, there's no particular way you have to go so that when you get to the Santiago de Compostela, you get the Foursquare badge for the pilgrimage route.
Yeah, the way you get from town to town is not defined. They don't check that. There's no way they would know, really, that you went one way or the other. I guess we should talk about the credential for people that don't know about the Camino. You have a sort of pilgrim passport that you use to verify that you are a pilgrim on a Camino as you travel through each of these small towns along the way. And on that passport, when you arrive at a hostel or in some restaurants, you can get a stamp that proves that you were in that town. You use those stamps when you arrive in Santiago de Compostela to kind of prove that you've done the required distances to achieve the Compostela, which is a kind of form that says you've completed the Camino.
I know that historically this is a religious pilgrimage, and it was typically done by people who were Catholic. I'm interested in doing it, and I'm not Catholic. What led you to choose this as a vacation option?
Well, several years ago, I had read a book by, I believe his name's Tim Moore, and it's called Travels with My Donkey. He went on the Camino with a donkey, which is even more unusual than taking a bicycle. I read the book and I put it back on the shelf, and I kind of had this idea floating around in the back of my head for a while. And when it came time to start planning vacation, it just sort of came to mind. And like I said, I didn't have enough time to do the hike, which I would have preferred to do, but I did have a bicycle in 2 weeks. So I did what I could with that.
Some logistics. You brought your own bike?
Yes, there are a number of different options for getting a bike in Spain and riding the Camino. You can ship your own bike over. You can check your bike on the plane, or you can rent bikes. They have one-way rental services in towns like Pamplona, which is where I started. After evaluating all those options, the shipping was very expensive. That's all determined by the size of the box, and I used a regular sized bike box that you might get from a cycling shop, or that your bike might arrive in if you ordered it. And I've read of people cutting the size of the box down to make it a little bit cheaper to ship, but ultimately I decided I would take my own bike because the price of renting somebody else's bike, which I don't know what the quality of that bike might be, versus checking my bike as luggage on the plane was comparable.
Interesting.
Yeah. It also depends on which carrier you fly on as far as cost. I was flying Delta because I had the ticket kind of before I decided that I would take my own bike. Some carriers will charge a lot more than others for bikes specifically. They're interested to know that it is a bike and not just a box that you're checking. So you want to check with your carrier, as far as their fees and rules regarding bicycles.
And then in terms of the bike rental, since there aren't that many people riding the Camino, it sounds like bike rental is just an option in general for somebody who wants to go over and do some bike riding, even if this isn't the route they wanted to do.
Sure. You can rent bicycles for whatever purpose in Spain, but there are some that cater to the Camino.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they encourage, I don't know if it's road bikes or mountain bikes, but you could probably get either.
And you were using a mountain bike. How in shape do you have to be to bike that route? Hiking, I've never got the impression it's a terribly strenuous route, except that it's a month long.
Well, my bike isn't exactly a mountain bike. I have a hybrid.
Got it.
So I don't have front suspension on the bicycle. It's just a solid fork. As far as the amount of effort involved in biking it versus hiking, I would say it's a lot easier to bike it than it is to hike it. I am not an avid cyclist by any means. Like at home, I don't ride every day or anything like that. I enjoy it, but I don't do it as much as someone else might. A serious cyclist would.
I guess for me, I'm curious of how big are the hills if I want to try and talk my wife into this. So,
yeah, there are a lot of hills. I started in Pamplona, ended in Santiago, so it starts off hilly, then it becomes more and more flat as you get to the plains in central northern Spain, and then it becomes hilly again. I would say for level of fitness, though, anybody could do this. What you might vary is the distance that you go per day. So if you only have 2 weeks, you'll want to calculate out how much time you need. If you enjoy being outside and riding your bike, I don't think it would be very hard to do.
And then is that how long you took? 2 weeks?
It took me about 10 days.
Okay. And that's about how many miles per day?
Well, I did about 60 kilometers a day.
Okay. So 36 miles or so.
Yeah. And, if you're a cyclist on the road, you can do way more than that. But
Sure.
The thing about the Camino itself is that it's not paved for the most part. Like only a small percentage of it is rural back roads and things like that. Most of it is unpaved gravel. It may be single track, so, a very thin trail that's very rocky. It may be red clay. So you get slowed down a lot depending on the weather and the terrain. There were plenty of points where I was going up a really rocky hill and I had to get off and just push it. But that said, doing it, and I don't necessarily recommend that you try to hurry through the Camino, because part of it is not about being at the end in Santiago. It's all about doing the Camino itself and being out there with other pilgrims and meeting people in the small towns and enjoying your time getting to Santiago, not necessarily arriving there.
Well, and that's a good transition away from the logistics into the experience. What surprised you, first of all, about the trip?
Well, the trail, the way itself is a lot more diverse than I imagined it would be when I was planning the trip. You see a lot of pictures. If you go online and you do research on what you're going to be seeing there, you always see like the huge plain with the winding dirt path on it and a couple of pilgrims just walking along leisurely. But it really transitions from a lot of different types of terrain and culture. And that's one of the things that I love about Spain is there's so many different little pockets of culture, and there's so many different things to see as you travel across it. But, you're always kind of surprised at what you might run into.
For example?
For example, going through the wine region of Spain, you come down from the hills, and then all of a sudden, for as far as you can see, there are vineyards, and you're just on this little red clay road riding through them. Or, at the end of a long day of going up and down hills, you finally see that church on the horizon there. Stuff like that. It's just very interesting to kind of be out there in rural Spain, and then you bump into these little pockets of culture.
Okay. And then just kind of bounding the experience, the best day, and then maybe the day you thought, who thought this was a good idea?
I'll start with the who thought this was a good idea day. That was probably day one, my first day out, because I left from Pamplona, or really just a little suburb right outside of Pamplona, and it was kind of raining and foggy. And the very first climb is Alto de Perdón, which, as I said, I had imagined, there's going to be these huge plains and like this nice winding road. Well, I mean, it's not Mount Everest, but climbing Alto de Perdón in the rain on the bicycle on single track. It's so foggy that you can barely make out the huge windmills like just up the edge of the hill, and you can't see anything of the city. It was so muddy that the wheels on the bike would no longer spin. So standing there cleaning mud out of the brakes on the bike, I kind of thought, what have I gotten myself into here? And as far as the best day, that one's tougher. And there's so many, every day is so nice out there. I was lucky to have really good weather the whole time. I was told that the weather could be very variable, and you can get storms and then sunlight in the afternoon, things like that. But
I love your attitude that you described pushing a bike uphill in the fog and the mud, and then say that you had good weather every day. But
yeah, I should say that one day, the first day, was the only day, and it had been raining in advance of my arrival all over northern Spain, but that day was the only day that wasn't perfect. Every other day it was always a little bit chilly, but it was just clear skies and just beautiful every single day after that.
Well, and it might be difficult for people who've only been to, for instance, Andalusia and seen the sort of the hot, warm, sunny parts of Spain to picture northern Spain, but I picture something that is a lot greener, so therefore a lot more rain.
Right. I've been down to Sevilla and other parts of Spain on previous trips, and the north is my favorite part. It's just so lush and green. It's a marked difference from southern Spain, where it's more like, I guess, the spaghetti western Texas kind of look to it. If people are planning on going to Spain, I would say, definitely go see the north, Barcelona, Bilbao, that area. None of those cities are on the Camino Frances, but they should definitely be visited if you go to Spain.
Okay. Who is the most interesting person you met along the way? My impression is that is part of the experience, is your fellow travelers.
That is definitely part of the experience. I felt a little unusual being the only person that I saw most days on a bicycle, but at night, when you stop at the hostels, you meet all the other people who've been, hiking all day. And I would say the most interesting person that I met was this Austrian man who had walked from his front door to where we were along the Camino barefoot. So, but he isn't really that unusual. So traditionally, if you were going to do the Camino, in the Middle Ages, you would start at your front door because you're not going to, hop on a plane or whatever.
Right.
And you would go all the way to Santiago. I met people who had walked from their homes in Italy to, wherever we were at that time on the Camino. So there's a lot of crazy stories out there. People do it for all different kinds of reasons. I would say the barefoot guy is definitely the most interesting of the people that I met.
Interesting.
So there's a long list.
What stands out from the trip? What are some of the highlights?
Well, there's a church in Santo Domingo, which is one of the cities along the way, that has a chicken coop inside of it with 2 chickens in it. That was kind of a novelty highlight for me, I think. I really wanted to see that. The reason those chickens are there has to do with legend, because I guess there was a innkeeper and a daughter. They were visited by, I think it was a theater troupe or something, of which there was a son. The daughter of the innkeeper fell in love with the visiting boy. He didn't return her affection yet. And so she took some silver, like a silver cup or something from her father's collection, put it in his luggage. They discover it. She said he was stealing from them, and the boy was to be put to death because at that time that was the punishment for theft. So they hung the boy, but basically the mayor of the town who had hung the boy was eating chicken, and he said, the boy is as dead as these chickens on my plate. And at that moment, the chickens on his plate came alive and started squawking and running around. So ever since then, they've kept chickens in the church.
In the church and off the menu, it sounds like.
Yes. In the city there, they have all kinds of little chicken-related souvenirs and food and cookies and things like that. So all in the shape of chickens. So that was one highlight. You also have the traditional highlights, like in the big cities, Burgos, Leon. They have really nice cathedrals that you can visit. So I always enjoy seeing those along the way. So yeah.
The fellow travelers, they accepted you even though you're a little bit of a slacker? You weren't going barefoot from Austria? Or?
Right. Yeah, people do the Camino for all their various reasons. Most of them are really friendly and really outgoing. I didn't have anybody really frown on using a bicycle for the Camino.
Didn't have anybody slap their head and say, I had never thought about using a bicycle?
No, I think they are probably envious though when you kind of fly by going downhill, because everybody struggles up the hills, but only the hikers struggle going down them. So no, I think in general the people along the way, the pilgrims along the way, are just amazingly friendly. You can stop, and there were a couple of times where I just didn't even ride the bike. I just hiked along with people that I met along the way. And, you talk about where you're from and what they do and why they're here, and, have a conversation for a good long ways. And that's really what the Camino is about, I think. It's about that sort of interaction along the way with other people. Because I met people from all over the world, from Korea, from Australia, Canada. According to some of the information I saw in one of the churches there, only 2% of the people who do the Camino are Americans. So you don't run into many Americans there.
No, we probably just don't have the time, mostly.
Yeah, that's probably true. I think the majority of the people who do the Camino are Spaniards.
Interesting. For
that section of the way. But yeah, I also met, I met a father and daughter team from South Africa, I think. They've done the Camino 4 times, a couple of different routes. So I guess there's a little bit of a fever that you get once you do it the one time.
And when you finish, I mean, obviously the purpose of this originally was to get to Santiago de Compostela and see where the relics of St. James were kept. And there were big celebrations. You went into town. What's it like now? Is it a letdown as you finally get there? Exultation?
As you approach Santiago de Compostela, you come up on this last hill. And from there, you can see the city. And at that point, I was pretty excited about it, because you do meet a lot of pilgrims and you do have a lot of conversations with people, especially later in the evening. But for most of the day, it's very solitary. You're by yourself. I went by myself and I was on the bicycle, so it may be more solitary to ride than if you walk. But I was glad to kind of see it and know that I had done this. But then as I got into the city, you realize, well, this is just another city, really. You come down into kind of the suburbs and you make your way through town, and then you come to this beautiful cathedral. But as part of that, and as part of it being Holy Year, there were just buses and just tons and tons and tons of tourists everywhere. So yeah, I would say it's a letdown, but it wasn't the reason for the trip, so it wasn't bad.
You stayed along the way at the various pilgrimage stops, the hostels or whatever along the way. How rustic or how modern are that?
It varies. There are some that have been renovated in just the last couple of years. They may have, heat and good showers and things like that, but the majority of them are definitely older. Some of them very, very old, and they will not have heat, and they may have only 1 or 2 showers for 30 or 40 people. The experience of being in the hostel, whether it's old or new, is kind of interesting too, because they range in size. You may have 12 people in a small town hostel. They also call them albergues. Or you may have 100 people in a huge room all sleeping together. So the quality of the accommodation isn't really that important to you after you've been riding or walking the entire day. You're just glad to see a bed. But if you're particular about those sorts of things, there are usually multiple hostels in a town, and you'll probably want to visit a couple of them and then make your determination, because there can be really kind of bad ones and really great ones just around the corner from each other. And they'll be essentially the same price. It's some of them are donation based, some of them are €7 a night. They're really cheap. But both the good ones and the bad ones are cheap, so you want to look around.
And do you meet many travelers coming the other way? Do people generally go from east to west?
No, I met one guy who was doing it backwards. And I think he was just kind of walking through life, so he'd gone one way and he was coming back the other way.
Interesting.
But no, for the most part, everybody that's going along there is going towards Santiago. And then once they arrive, they're hopping on the plane or getting a rental car, taking the train or whatever to get out of there. So it's not like the old days.
One thing that you saw along the route that just made you laugh and say only on the Camino de Santiago.
There's a lot of weird artwork on the Camino, and I would classify it, I guess, as a sort of graffiti almost. There's one place where there's this like scarecrow type statue that has been erected. I have no idea why, but people hang things off of him. So he's got like this wind-blown umbrella and all these like shoes and like whatever the detritus of their Camino was. I think people lose a lot of things along the way from packing too much. But he's just sort of standing out in the middle of nowhere, just greeting all of the different pilgrims who come along. That was probably one of the more unusual things I saw. There's also a lemonade stand just out in the middle of nowhere where these hippies, I think the lead guy's name was David. He's kind of popular on the Camino. He's just out there in the middle of nowhere, living in a barn, selling teas and drinks and things from a stand right outside. It seems a little weird when you come from your regular day-to-day life, but out there it's party, it's fellowship and having fun. So it's kind of cool to come up on that stuff.
You talked about packing. One thing you should know and one thing you should pack before you go on the trip, and maybe one thing you should not pack.
Well, I would say definitely want to pack as little as possible. I had 2 changes of bicycle gear and my regular clothes, just a pair or 2. So you don't want to pack, your hair dryer. You don't want to pack anything that you can't just, get easily in the city. The hostels aren't going to provide you with anything, but you don't need that much to do the Camino. You need some soap and a shower every day or 2, and that's about it. It really depends, though, because I saw people who traveled extremely lightly with very little things, and then you see people who just have these huge backpacks. So I would just say pack the minimum required, because it's not like a hiking trip where you're going to be camping or anything like that. You don't need a tent, for example, because you're always going to have a roof over your head. It's not like a traditional like outing in the sense that you need a lot of, I guess, survival gear or anything like that. You probably don't need your makeup and all that kind of stuff, because people along the way are looking pretty rough. Especially the further along you get. It's kind of strange too, because as you go towards Santiago, the hikers, they get more and more ragged looking. You can tell that wherever they're coming from, it's been a tough journey. But you reach a certain point around, I think it's 60 kilometers or so, where all of a sudden you start seeing these fresh, clean looking people with like day packs. They're the majority of the pilgrims, I think, per year. They're doing the minimum distance. I don't remember if it's 60 kilometers or 100 kilometers, but it's kind of strange to see those 2 groups kind of start to overlap as you get closer to Santiago. And I guess that's another option, if people want to experience the Camino, but they don't want to ride a bike or can't ride a bike or whatever. They also have these kind of bus tours that travel along the Camino. They drop you off. You go and you hike maybe 4 miles through some small town or city of significance. And then you get back on the bus and you go down to the next point. So you don't have to do the whole thing. I think the kind of hardcore pilgrims frown on that, but that is an option if you want to do it. I mean, I would encourage anybody to just go and like be out there for whatever time you have available, because it's worthwhile.
As we go to wind this down, anything else that we should know before we try and repeat your journey?
I don't think so. I mean, it's a pretty simple experience if you just start at the beginning and keep going till you get there.
All right, then the last 2 questions, and you probably know which ones are coming here. Finish this sentence. You really know you're on the Camino de Santiago when what?
When you can't get any sleep because the guy from Italy 3 feet from you is snoring all night long. I would say is you definitely feel like you're on the Camino. Then there's a lot of brotherhood in that, I guess.
And then if you had to summarize the trip in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say adventure, solitude, and fellowship with the other pilgrims.
An interesting combination. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show and for sharing with us your trip of biking the Camino de Santiago.
Thank you, Chris. I really enjoy the show. I'm glad to be a part of it.
I actually have an internet resource for you. I haven't done that many of those on this show because we've been doing a lot more of those on This Week in Travel every week. You can check out that podcast if you're interested in much more detailed conversation about the travel industry and travel news. But the resource is Sneakaway, and this is a new site from TripAdvisor where I do work. And what it is deep discount hotel deals on specific hotels, but often the discounts are something like 50% off. So it's worth looking at. Basically, you get on a newsletter and they send you out the new deals. They're all over the world, and they may be some in an area that you're interested in. And if you see something that you like, you take advantage of the deal and save a lot of money. So check that out. If you go to the link amateurtraveler.com/sneakaway, then if you sign up and use it, then I also get a bonus. So amateurtraveler.com/sneakaway. In news from the community, Wes left a comment on the episode to travel to Xi'an, China. Says, I visited Xi'an as part of an Intrepid traveler trip, backroads to Kunming. Intrepid does low-to-the-earth tours, trains locally owned accommodations, and local guides. Xi'an is part of many packaged tours. The Terracotta Warriors are a must. Our group also visited a dinner show for tourists where food featured dumplings. I enjoyed bike riding along the top of the city walls. The most took an hour if you move along quickly, but it's very cheap. Visited the Wild Goose Pagoda on my last morning. Touring takes less than an hour. A climb to the top of the pagoda requires an additional admission. One note about Xi'an that I don't believe was mentioned and probably belongs with many China destination podcasts. The pollution was quite oppressive in the spring. Don't underestimate just how bad it can get. I found it manageable, but I did get a cold not soon after arrival, and I'm sure the pollution contributed. Yeah, that's a very good point, Wes. Certainly, if you're going to Beijing, I think people have heard and seen after the Olympics there how bad the pollution can get. But that's true in many of the industrialized cities, and Xi'an is no longer just a little town out there in the west, but is a major city as well. And Sam's comment was, love Xi'an also. Your journey sounds similar to mine, but I'd like to add one feature of the area that is incredible. Highly recommend side trip Huashan. You can hire a day tour there from Xi'an. I stayed in a youth hostel at the Bell Tour that offered this service, and this holy Taoist monastery with a gondola ride up to the almost summit is incredibly beautiful, spiritual, awesome, natural landscapes, views phenomenally different from the China that you see in other parts of the tourism circuit. And then Sam actually put a link in there for his pictures from there. And then lastly, we also heard from Gabriel, who had a longer comment, so I'm going to only pick out a few things. He commented that the only walled city in China which has perfectly preserved walls is a city called Pingyao, which is in Shanxi. And so that might be worth checking out. Regarding Chinese trains, hard sleepers aren't quite like the couchettes that I was used to in Europe, as many of them don't locate the bunks in cabins, so people walking by in the corridor can see your feet, and people even spit on train floors. That said, they beat hard seats, which I unfortunately suffered through one night. And his secret to crossing the street in China is to go boldly, and the traffic will accommodate you. To read all of his comments, check out the link in the show notes to the Xi'an episode. With that, we're going to bring this episode of The Amateur Traveler to a close. It is Christmas Eve, and I haven't wrapped any presents yet, so I need to get to that. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, do what Sam, Vin, Wes, and Gabriel did and leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. As always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit